Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Friday Ramblings. I'm your host, and as many of you who have watched this series over the many years know, I am a fan of the 80s. Heck, I grew up in the 80s, and its movies are some of the best things of the 80s I still love to this day. Specifically, Ghostbusters. We are a Ghostbusters loving channel here, folks. And big part of that is the trio of Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, and Ivan Reitman. Now, what's that got to do with today's entry? No, we're not discussing Ghostbusters because we like to save that for October and spooky Halloween. And it is not, in fact, spooky Halloween. It is springtime. So we're discussing a different movie from the 80s that all three men were involved in, although only Bill Murray starred in it. Harold Ramis sticking to his writing credentials this time, not playing a major on-roll character like he had in other movies. And of course, Ivan Reitman directing. We are discussing Meatballs. Now, Meatballs is a story of a summer camp and the misadventures that happen there over the summer. The term meatballs comes from basically the slang term for the various losers that make up Camp North Star, as it is not the most prestigious camp in the city to send your kids to. That would be Camp Mohawk, located nearby on the other side of the lake, and our preferred camps, hated rivals. Now, rounding out the main cast, you have Bill Murray as Tripper Harrison, the head counselor. His secondary counselor, and specifically head of the various girls at the camp, Roxanne, and the camp owner and director, Morty Melnick, who is your stereotypical old man nerd, and spends most of the movie having various pranks played on him or being the main target of Bill Murray's infamous acerbic wit. Now, Tripper and Roxanne have a long history of various flirtations that continue almost immediately as soon as camp starts. They are both in charge of the various counselors in training, referred to often by the acronym CITs. And the CITs do most of the interaction directly with the campers. The main exception to this is our head camper, Rudy Gerner, a first-time visitor to Camp North Star who is lonely and finding it hard to make new friends at the camp, as he is not the most naturally sociable person. After the first couple days, he attempts to run away from camp, and Tripper, recognizing that he's a good kid that just doesn't understand the camp ecosystem and how to thrive there, takes Rudy under his wing, not only giving him a pep talk about returning to camp, but encouraging the kid to hang out with him whenever he's feeling down in the dirts, as Tripper routinely functions as a wonderful big brother role model to Rudy. The main aspect they like to do together is morning jogging, which Rudy quickly finds out he is quite adept at, having good cardio. Over time, though, Rudy himself helps Tripper out by encouraging him to not just flirt with Roxanne, but properly court her into a good relationship. Now, we also see the various CITs doing what teenagers do, and that is mess around in the pranking sense with each other, as well as romancing each other. particularly infamous scene sees two of the more loser sides of the CIT males attempting to spy on the female CITs in their cabin at night, hoping to catch them in a state of partial dress, and when getting caught, suffering the consequences with a little bit of corporal punishment for their own good. However, things still work out for everybody, and even our loser CITs do manage to find themselves finding a couple girls that don't mind their company. Of course, all this leads to the official rivalries between the camps. That is started with a basketball game during which Camp North Star, deciding they can't win, decide to publicly embarrass the basketball players of Camp Mohawk before running for their bus and Tripper making sure it leaves at top speed to escape the wrathful Camp Mohawk. Thus, it is set the Olympiad. Yep, multiple days of various games pitting the two camps' young campers against each other, with the CITs competing in some events, but not all of them. But Camp Mohawk decides to, when they can't win fairly, cheat as often as they can. Fortunately, after a couple rounds of this, Camp North Star kids figure it out and strike back, countermanding some of the cheating and allowing North Star to hang on by the skin of their teeth, although they are still underdogs leading into things. This is some of the most fun parts of the movie, as it's basically a wonderful montage of kids having fun, both officially and unofficially, and more importantly, giving Bill Murray, along with, go ahead and double check my cast here, Harvey Atkin as Morty, and Kate Lynch as Roxanne, a break from driving the plot and carrying the movie's comedy. The CITs do their best, but again, they are teenage actors and they're not as well experienced in comedy as our leading man, Bill. So it is good that we get the glory of montage and friendly competition, sometimes unfriendly competition, to give the comedy a little bit of a break and remind ourselves this movie's not all about Bill Murray, who is even at this point in the 80s the biggest star in the movie, but it's an ensemble cast piece. The big finale shows off with our resident big boy, Fink, finally, after years, beating Camp Mohawk's big brawny eater, quote, the stomach, in a weeder eating contest, bringing Camp North Star within enough points that they can surpass Mohawk if they win the final event, which is a marathon around the camp. Specifically, 4-mile cross-country run. However, with their long-standing runner out with an injury from an earlier game, seems like all is lost until Tripper volunteers Rudy to go do it. Many of the campers who still aren't 100% sold on Rudy and his shy nature initially disagreeing, but Tripper pointing out, hey, nobody else is willing to do it, and if we forfeit, we lose. So even if he loses, nothing's changed. The only chance we have of winning is letting Rudy compete. Tripper giving Rudy some last-minute advice on defeating the larger opponent, who is nicknamed Horse for his ability to gallop across the countryside. Get it? Because it's all about running. Rudy manages to, following Tripper's advice and believing in himself, win the day, win the respect of his peers, and, more importantly, find out that you can still be yourself, even if yourself isn't a natural center of attention, and still enjoy not just your life, but things like summer camp. It's a good moral for everybody. So what about Tripper and Roxanne? After taking a trip with the CITs just before the Olympiad, where they can all kind of relax and get away from the wee little one campers, Tripper and Roxanne decided to properly admit their attraction to each other, as a few of the CITs did as well. These things happen when little eyes are not watching. Hence the enjoyment of an overnight trip like this. And as everybody leaves camp at the end of the summer, discuss moving in with each other so Tripper and Roxanne can have a proper relationship. Thus, everything leaves on a happy note except Morty, who suffers from one last prank, being left behind in bed on a raft in the middle of the lake. Because, hey, you got a character who basically exists to be made fun of, you got to close the movie out with one last prank. Did the movie do good? Well, let's see. Now, for reference, I did say, quote, the 80s here, but officially the movie did come out in 1979. So, I mean, I consider an 80s movie because it just has a lot of humor that would become very pronounced and typical of 80s comedies. But, for the record, it did come out in 79, just before the 80s. Still, operating on a budget of $1.6 million, it made $70 million at the box office, so I do believe there was a profit there. And the movie carries a score of 73% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 37 reviews. And got a mixed bag of reviews from professional critics. Gene Siskel giving the film 2.5 stars out of 4, stating that it is pleasant as can be, but there's hardly a major belly laugh in it. It's all very sweet, but funny, not particularly. Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times, though, calls the film a fast, funny send-up of summer camp life that is not as all-out raunchy as the earlier made Animal House, but it's hilarious in a similar blissfully uncomplicated, nutty way. The movie, as we said, did make good bank. And when it was all said and done, it was the highest grossing film in the US, without any US investment at the time, being a primarily Canadian-made film, until 3 years later with Chariots of Fire. The film was also the first Canadian film to gross more than $2.5 million in Canada, and won the Golden Reel Award. The movie has seen home release in various formats, but here's the big question. With all that money, was there sequels? Yes, there was. Unfortunately, the sequels are a far cry disappointment and can basically be ignored. The second movie was made in 1979, stars Richard Mulligan, Hamilton Camp, Kim Richards, Missy Rowe, and others, had no involvement from Reitman, Ramis, or Bill Murray. and was about a completely different camp with a completely different set of characters. Still, it is a comedy. Wouldn't really hurt to see it. But being first written in '79, basically as soon as they knew the first one was profitable, and not being released until 1984, the movie's more like the base concept of Meatballs, but being done by a completely different group than a direct sequel. In 1987, they attempted to fix this by, although they still had no returning cast, both on-screen or off, trying to make a storyline linked to the original Meatballs 3 Summer Job, bringing back Rudy Gurner, who is now an adult and one of the camp counselors, working a summer job for a boss named Mean Gene, who is nicknamed Mean for good reasons. It is not officially set at a summer camp, but rather a nearby marina, and like a lot of stuff from the 80s, without a huge cast of children, it is more of a sex comedy. Basic plot being a recently deceased porn star is denied entrance in the afterlife, being given one last chance by helping out the still awkward Rudy Gurner to lose his virginity. It also features Shannon Tweed as the love goddess and Caroline Ray as in her debut role as uncredited beach girl number 4. I give them credit for trying to bring back one character affiliated with the movie, but aging Rudy Gurner up this much and going the sex comedy route, which can be quite hilarious in and of itself, they still couldn't find that proper flavor of the original Meatballs movie. This leads us to the last attempt to make money off the name. In 1992, we got Meatballs 4, featuring Corey Feldman and Sarah Douglas. We're back to a camp, and this time we feature Corey Feldman as Ricky Wade, a water skiing instructor who is trying to whip up attendance at the camp in order to keep it open. Thus, we get the usual comedy shenanigans of rivalries from the more popular camp, and it's basically direct-to-video schlock. The movie itself was originally written as a unconnected movie, but later retooled and retitled into Meatballs 4 to, as I said, try and squeeze a few more pennies out of the original's iconic legacy. So where does that sit? Well, simply put, by all means, if you like your Bill Murray, if you like your late 70s, early 80s comedy, that's basically a lot of fluff with just enough plot to connect all the jokes together and some feel-good morals, see Meatballs. The sequels, maybe see if you got some alcohol in the house to help make it funnier. Sadly, not every franchise can be epic. And if Meatballs shows anything, it's that sometimes, no matter how much money a movie makes, you just need to let it stop at 1. Especially if you can't get anybody who is actually behind all the goodness of the movies to come back for the sequels. I mean, not keeping the same actors, I can understand. Not bringing back any of the writers, not bringing back the same director. No, just don't do it. Weirdos. But try not to be too negative here at Roulette Productions. We're going to focus on the awesomeness of the original. And with that, we're going to bid you adieu, and we're going to see you in 7 days for the next Friday Rambling, because every Friday we ramble, and there's always another Friday on the horizon. And don't forget to tune in, because we are only a couple episodes away from episode 200. And you know I'm going to do something special for episode 200. Stay tuned.